Greetings, my name is Kevin and you're watching Quantum Prophet. Today's video, which I'm calling Crash Course in Spiritual Survival, The Two Towers, is going to focus on prayer and meditation. Things have been pretty rough here the past couple weeks, actually the past year and a half, and I know a lot of people are experiencing some depression, some anxiety, some panic attacks, even people who are normally pretty spiritually healthy or mentally healthy. And so in today's video, I'm going to hopefully give you some tips and tricks on how you can weather the storm and maybe maintain your spiritual fitness just a little bit better. Before I get into it though, I want to do a little bit of a disclaimer. If you're experiencing severe, prolonged depression and having thoughts about harming yourself or taking other drastic actions, or you're suffering prolonged anxiety, panic attacks, or things such as this, I encourage you to seek professional help from a mental health professional. Speaking as someone myself who suffered from extreme depression for several years and also crippling anxiety, I can say from personal experience that counseling and therapy literally saved my life, along with medication. So there's no shame at all in seeking help for those issues. So if you have those, please, I encourage you to reach out and seek help. In my circumstance, no amount of prayer and meditation could relieve me of those challenges. So I encourage you to seek those out. So that being said, let's move forward into the rest of the topics. So let's start with prayer. So I'm not going to really go into prayer as far as how to pray or what to pray. I think most people, especially in the West, know about prayer, know that it's about talking to God. I'm sure if you were raised in any kind of religious faith, Catholicism, Baptist, Methodist, anything like that, you probably learned a bunch of prayers, and I'm not going to go into specifics. Suffice it to say that the part of prayer that I'm going to look at or kind of focus on more is based on the teachings of Jesus in the Bible. And when I say the teachings of Jesus, again, I'm not speaking of religion or what different, strands or traditions taught as far as, again, Catholicism or Methodist or Lutherans. I'm talking purely about what Jesus said in the Bible. So if we look at what Jesus said and what he did, the first thing that stands out is that he hung out with people that we would consider today to be undesirables. So he hung out with prostitutes, tax collectors, although I'm not saying tax collectors are undesirable, but back then they were, and they might be these days too, but he hung out with what we would call the degenerates, the poor people, the sick, and not that I think they are, but I'm saying, you know what I'm saying. In any case, the concepts that Jesus taught about prayer are extremely difficult and challenging if you look at him what he said, because he said, pray for those who persecute you and love your enemies. So what I'm going to suggest in this and the proposal I'm going to make, and this is probably going to strike you, most of you, as being very objectionable at first, but hopefully you'll hear this out, is that the way that Christ taught it regarding prayer, to me, leads to the conclusion that there really isn't evil per se. There is ignorance. There's an astonishing level of ignorance in people that do horrible, horrible things. The last words that Christ supposedly said when he died on the cross were, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." Now we can interpret that as him saying, forgive the Romans for crucifying me because they don't know what they do, and there's some validity in that. Some people would interpret it as him saying that about the Jews who sent him to the cross instead of Barabbas. I would say, and I'm sure some people have come to this conclusion themselves, that he's talking about all of humanity and saying forgive all of them because they don't know what they do. They don't know what they're doing. And my personal interpretation of that is that he was saying that forgive people because none of us know, or most of us don't realize, that when we do something to other people, we're literally doing it to ourselves. So when he said, that what you do unto the least of mine, you also do to me. Some people take these as nice little aphorisms and little cliche sayings, but I personally think that what he was saying was fundamental spiritual and universal truth. It wasn't just some new agey thing to feel good. And a lot of so-called Christians don't really practice what he said to. Again, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. That's a tough order. I mean, I don't even do that sometimes. It's very challenging, especially if I think that those people are evil or they're bad. that is where the crux of this whole issue lies, is when we start seeing other people as bad or evil. And when we see people or things as evil, there's a connotation there that there's some force, there's some, maybe being like Satan or some demons or some malevolent whatever that opposes God or opposes light that can get us. And I'm not saying that that isn't the case, because I do believe in these a topic subject matter of an egregore, which was basically a psychic entity, something that's created by thoughts that people, not just individuals, but cultures or groups of people create. And I do believe in those, and they do have power. But when it comes down to it, if you look at a case like, say, the universally probably most evil person people think of is Hitler. Hitler did atrocious, horrible, horrible things. Probably one of the worst human beings to ever live. But at a deep fundamental level, it's not even questionable that Jesus would say we need to pray for him, we need to forgive him, we need to pray for those who persecute us and love our enemies. And so the only way I can reconcile it is that Jesus didn't think Hitler was evil. Jesus would have thought Hitler is extremely ignorant because he doesn't recognize who and what he really is. And so I would say I interpret that myself as being, at a deep fundamental level, there is no real evil. There is a huge amount of ignorance. So for me, what that does is that removes a ton of fear, because I'm no longer fearful of some evil entities or some evil demons or whatever coming after me. I'm not afraid of, there's this evil force that's trying to take over the world. There are bad people there are people with malintent who are doing a lot of bad stuff. Again, that's not saying that's not true, but on a deeper spiritual level, everything comes back to ignorance, and everything comes back to healing. We can't banish that any more than daytime can banish night. In other words, Carl Jung talked about the shadow side of the self, and we're so busy trying to get rid of that and say it's evil, it's bad, let's kill it, let's get rid of it. And that's just not going to work. Christ taught we need to recognize it, we need to forgive it, and we need to heal it. And so that's the first pillar of my spiritual practice, which is getting rid of the concept or the ideology of evil and trying to kill or banish or get rid of or whatever what I consider to be evil, and instead seeking to heal it, to pray for it, to accept it as what it is, and to realize that it is just ignorance, that those people, those egregores, those psychic entities, those demons, those whatever, just aren't conscious of who or what they really are, because they're not that, if that makes any sense. So that's the first pillar. The next pillar that I'm going to talk about is meditation. And in my experience, the best tradition to learn meditation, or the tradition that's basically based on it, is Buddhism. Now, for a lot of people in the West, Buddhism, I guess, how can I put it? A lot of people like to have the little Buddha sitting on their counter or whatever, and don't necessarily understand the roots of, or the teachings of it. If some of them did, they probably wouldn't have the Buddha there. But it's about a lot more than yoga. And nothing wrong if you do yoga, that's awesome. But so Buddhism is based heavily on meditation. Of course, we all know the image again of the Buddha sitting in lotus position meditating. I view Christianity as kind of like in the yin-yang, the active praying, that part of it, and Buddhism as the other, the quiet, the still, the meditating. Buddhism's central teachings are something called the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths, which I encourage you to look up, are basically about suffering. And without going into extreme detail, basically they state that there is suffering in the world, but there's a way we can overcome suffering, individual suffering, and the way that we can do that is by letting go of attachment. The way that Buddhism recommends that we do this is by focusing on something called accepting the impermanence of things. In other words, realizing that everything is impermanent. Everything is in a state of flux. Every single person who is alive right now is going to die. It's just the truth. In the West, we spend so much of our lives trying to avoid death at all costs. I mean, You hear of, the whole thing of celebrities and everybody trying to extend life more and more, and trying to cheat death and immortality, and now we want to upload our consciousness into computers. And I'm not saying necessarily any of that's bad, but the fact is that in trying to avoid accepting or confronting that, and accepting the fact that we and everything that is alive right now is eventually going to pass, we have this, I think it causes this existential, or I guess not existential, but inherent anxiety in a lot of Westerners, because we try to grasp onto things. We don't want things to change. We don't want to age. We don't want people to die. And that's natural to some extent. But what I would encourage people to do who are watching this is just to study a little bit about Buddhism and to learn about meditation. And the reason I say, you're probably thinking, well, I thought you were going to talk about meditation, and now you're going off on this, is that the meditation, the specific meditation that I'm referring to in this video, because I have another video on how to meditate, so if you want to know more about specifics on that, you can check that out. But what I'm talking about in this one for our spiritual survival is there's a meditation in Buddhism that basically, the gist of it is to meditate on your death. So, and that sounds morbid, I know, from a Westerner perspective, but the point of the meditation is to actually meditate and to go through the process of what it would be like when you die. The whole thing from beginning to end. And as you do this and you meditate on it, and in meditation you realize that it's not really happening, so you can do it as hope, the intent is more of as an objective observer. You know it's not happening, but you can feel those feelings. And the intent of that is to bring to light all those things that might cause us to either fear death, those things that we might regret when we're on our deathbed, those things that are hiding in the back of our consciousness that are causing us pain or remorse or sadness or anxiety. And so we can bring those into light and focus on them and start working on them now in our conscious lives before we get there. Once you do that and you bring to light those things and you work on those, as you continue the practice, I found that I don't fear death as much, because I take a more conscious approach in my daily life to ensure that if I were to, make the transition today, that I wouldn't have fear or regret or remorse or all these horrible, scary feelings, because I've already gone through those. So I don't know, hopefully that makes some sense. And I'll put some links down in the bottom of the description. And I would encourage you, if you suffer from severe anxiety about death, if you're really afraid of death, if it's something you just aren't ready to get into, don't practice that meditation yet. It's something to be worked up to. But if you're at a point where, you think you can do something a little more advanced, I do encourage you to. In Buddhism, it's basically seen as one of these supreme meditations. And again, a lot of Westerners don't know about it. It's not something a lot of people talk about, or even Buddhists, because they know that Westerners we have a very different view of it, and it can cause a lot of anxiety. So I'll put some links in the bottom, the description, about those meditations, because they really freed me. I've done them, and I've done some more along those lines that I won't talk about. They're really advanced, but basically, by confronting your fears and confronting the things that scare you in meditation, you can bring those things to light, and you can do it in a safe environment. You can do it within the confines of your own consciousness. You can bring in light. You can bring in, Christ consciousness to help you. You can bring in goddess energy. You can work on those things in what I call a safe space or a safe environment, and work on them instead of working on them when the rubber hits the road, when you're laying in that bed and they're telling you you're not gonna, and like, again, it sounds morbid, and I don't mean to make it that way, but it's an unavoidable fact. The science tells us that in, I don't know what it is, like 2 billion years or something, the sun is going to become a giant, I don't know, a red giant or whatever, and totally incinerate this planet. So it's going to happen. I mean, it's just, that's the nature of life. And rather than feeling that crippling anxiety about it, if we face that, then we can become stronger. Of course, a lot of this is contingent upon whether you believe in reincarnation or not, which I personally do. And I base that as much on science as anything. The first law of thermodynamics is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it can only be transformed. So I firmly stand on reincarnation based on the first law of thermodynamics, that whatever this consciousness, this life form I have, this life energy, it can't be destroyed, it can only be transformed. Whether or not my conscious mind, myself, is aware of that or not, that remains to be seen. But the fact is that energy is not going to be destroyed because that's science. So that's one of the little crossovers that I like to bring out. So I think that's pretty much the gist of what I wanted to talk about in this video. I'll leave some links again in the description, and I invite you to do some research on your own, to go back and reread the Gospels with an open mind, and don't have any preconceptions about, looking at it from a Christianity perspective or anything. Just read what Jesus said, just on its own as it is, and see what you get out of it. See if you get that spirit of more of love and prayer in a manner of not seeing evil and these bad people that we're trying to fight against, but more that we need to heal these people, that they're ignorant. And meditation. Look into doing some meditation. As I mentioned, I have another video out there on it. And as you do meditation, get deeper into it and do some of those ones of meditating on death. Like I said, it sounds morbid, but it is so incredibly transformative. And I think it will give you some freedom and some peace that you might not otherwise have. So these are really challenging times for spiritual people. It is. I'm telling you what, I had super anxiety this morning. The sun is doing some crazy stuff. The hurricane, Afghanistan, the COVID. I mean, if you're feeling stuff, that's normal. But the fact is that if you have some spiritual tools in your tool belt, you can at least feel that stuff, but not go too far down the rabbit hole and get hopeless and despondent, because you can understand that part of that's normal, and you can learn to use some of that to your own spiritual development and benefit, if that makes sense. So I wish you all the best of weeks. I pray that you're able to use some of these tools and they provide some use and some helpfulness to all of you. And I thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Peace, love, light, and many blessings to you on your path.